Some stories are buried, others are erased. Each tale you hear is either true or spun from fiction. It's up to you to decide. Subscribe if you haven't. Dim the lights. Let's begin. The Green Children of England. 1. They came up from the ground like turnips pulled wrong, blinking, blinking, blinking at the sun they didn't know. They were standing among the tall grass, like they were just dropped there. No sign of trampled feet around them. The boy was smaller, a bundle of knees and collarbones. The girl held his hand like it was the only real thing left in the world. Their clothes were stitched from something the villagers couldn't name. Neither wool nor flax. The fabric looked soaked in pond water and wrung dry in moonlight. It shimmered where it shouldn't. The seams too neat, the thread either too thick, like hair from a horse's mane, or too fine, like spider dragline. One child wore a clasp of bark, the other had buttons that looked like pressed seeds. Their skin was green. Not leaf green, not comic book green. It was the green of jade under dust, of the underside of birch leaves, of river stones seen through algae, celadon teacup green, liver failure green, uneasy green. Her hair was blonde, long, almost white, tangled with a leaf still in it. His was dark and shorter, curling like moss against his scalp. Their eyes, wide and flickering, reflected the field in miniature, with clouds skimming over. They spoke, or tried to. The sounds were rounded, then suddenly sharp, slipping and reshaping as they reached the villagers' ears. "Shalun," said the girl. "Muru," whispered the boy. "Athan," they said together. It was either gibberish or language, bent sideways, like a mirror that reflected the back of your head instead of your face. One reaper dropped his sickle, another crossed himself, a third muttered something about elves, and the fourth, being practical, spat and said, "We should fetch the Lord." 2. They were found on the lip of a wolf pit, a deep, narrow shaft dug to catch wolves or worse. Its walls were steep and muddy, bottom lined with wooden spikes still stained with old blood. Goat offal had been dumped nearby as bait or offering. Wolf pits were set around the edges of fields between wheat and wood, between safe and not safe. You didn't fall into them. You were either hunted into them or you came up from them. That day had been warm. Harvest was near done, the air syrup thick and still. Storm clouds bloomed in the west. One reaper said later the field had been silent before the children appeared. No crows, no wind, just heat and the sound of wheat being cut like hair from a sleeping head. They were taken gently, though not without muttering, to the house of Sir Richard de Calne. The villagers stood and stared. An old woman sat on a low wall and stared harder. Children tried to get close until mothers hissed them back. The girl never let go of the boy's hand. A dog barked once and was beaten for it. Sir Richard came down from his manor, which stood on a low hill behind twisted apple trees. He rode a grey mare, without a sword which had long ago been left hanging from a door, unused. His hands were stained with pearwood sap. He had once fought for the king, but now preferred books, baked apples and maps with places he thought existed, but really didn't. When he saw the children, he stared. Not kindly, not cruelly, just long. "They're green," he said, "very green, my lord." "They must be sick," said the steward. "Or hungry," someone else offered. "Or drunk on God knows what." "Or they've drunk absinthe and come from hell," said a voice that no one claimed. They brought the children to the manor. The boys shied at the sight of the hearth. The girl covered her nose when they passed the drying fish. A merchant was selling oranges at the edge of town. Habiu had blinked at them like they were burning coals. Neither child liked the smell of bread. When a cook handed them a slice, they shrank away from the white, fleshy interior covered with holes, confused. When they refused to eat, the servants drew a bath, heated water in pails over the fire. They were more curious if they were green from head to toe than in need of washing. When the girl stepped in, she flinched, then floated. The boy stayed still while steam rose from his skin. When the scullery maid tried to scrub him, he hissed. His eyes darted left and right. The girl kept looking at the ceiling as if she expected it to part and open. The children didn't know they were green. They were too busy looking at everyone else, pink and plump and oddly soft. They must sit in this water too long, until their colour has run off, she thought. Then the staff tried to feed them again. Soaked bread, but this time something sweeter, as if they could trick them. Goat's milk, suet pudding. The girl pinched the food between her fingers and stared at it like it had betrayed her. When she tasted milk, she spat it out and said something sharp in her own tongue, then grabbed her brother's hand and held it like it might keep her anchored. That night they slept in the manor's solar, on clean linen stuffed with goose down. The girl lay awake. The boy dreamed and whimpered. It was 3 days before anyone thought of beans. Broad beans, fava, fat pods full of pale jade seeds. The cook brought them in from the garden in a wicker basket still wet with dew. One bean fell and rolled to the girl's foot. She gasped, made a sound, high and thin, like a string snapping in the cold, and dove. They tore the pods open with thumb and tooth, popped the beans raw, bitter, grassy, cold from the morning. They ate until their fingers were slick and green again. They chewed and swallowed, and then they laughed, rolled on the stone floor, giggled and hiccuped and said words no one knew. The girl pressed a pod to her brother's forehead like a crown. He kicked his legs and squealed. Green children laugh too, it turns out. The manor stood still and watched. The Lord was called so he could watch too. From then on they began to live, at least one of them did. 3. The girl was older. Her eyes stayed wary longer. The boy, however, faded, not suddenly, but like a candle burning from both ends. First he stopped laughing at the bean games, then he began sleeping more, curling up in places he hadn't before. Beneath tables, behind curtains, once even in the cold ashes of the hearth. His fingers trembled when he tried to peel a pod. His feet seemed to forget where the floor was. He began speaking in their old language again, even though the girl had stopped. She tried to hush him, afraid of what the cook might say, but he only blinked at her, slow as a frog in winter, and whispered, "Ethan." At night, he sweated. In the morning, he shivered. His skin took on a deeper green, like pond water left too long in shade. His breath sounded like it was coming from behind a door. One morning, she tried to wake him and couldn't. His mouth was open slightly, as if still telling her something. She curled around him on the feather bed, arm across his chest. She stayed like that until someone came looking. Some said it was the baptism, others the water. One blamed the priest. A few said the world itself had killed him. One whispered that the girl had taken his strength to survive, that she drank him in without knowing. They buried him under a crooked hawthorn at the far edge of town. It was raining. Not hard, just a light, earthy rain that turned the soil to clay and made the grave collapse slightly before the last spadeful. The villagers stood beneath the elms. No one spoke. A man coughed. Someone crossed themselves with the wrong hand. The girl did not cry, but she sniffed. Once. Some said she was cold, others said she had a cold. No one agreed on what name he'd been given. Some said he'd never had one. Others called him Elias, or Stephen, or nothing at all. When they lowered him in, she dropped something small onto his chest. It was a pod, split open, still damp inside. No one saw where she'd gotten it. She didn't eat beans for a week after. But she lived. 4. Her green faded slowly. Her palms pinkened first, then her soles. Her throat stayed green the longest, like it didn't want to give up. When her tongue bent around English, the villagers smiled. When her skin lost some of its hue, they relaxed. When she stopped whispering in her other language, they said, "Good." No one ever tried to learn her language, to imagine her sky, to see what she saw. They only asked her to comply. She was given a name, Agnes, or maybe Marjorie. Something English, plain and clean. She never corrected them. She was quiet, but she watched. Sometimes she whispered to the geese who she claimed understood her. They hissed less around her than others. Once a fox came near the coop and froze, not from fear, but as if it had been confused mid-step. It turned its head sideways and tap-danced away. She worked in the manor once she was strong enough to hold a ladle. She stirred porridge, swept rushes. She learned not to touch silver for more than a few seconds. It made her fingers sting. She sang odd little songs with no tune. She avoided mirrors. The other servants didn't like to share a bed with her. They said she whispered in her sleep. One said she breathed like the wind in a bottle. Another claimed she never closed her eyes. One man said she had wicked eyes. One boy tried to marry her. Another just tried to touch her skin. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She just looked at them until they left. The manor's daughter, Cecily, once painted her own arms green with crushed fern and chalk to see if it would make the Lord look at her the same. It didn't. It only made her look ill. She learned the names of herbs. She learned how to mend wool. She once lit a candle without flint. Or so the scullery maid said, wide-eyed. The girl said nothing, but her hands were warm. The Lord, who had 9 children of his own, took to asking Agnes questions every Sunday after Mass. He gave her dried pears and had her sit near the fire and speak of where she'd come from. It became a ritual. No one ever noticed that she never ate the pears. It was always dim there, she said. Not night. Not day, like the sky was holding its breath. Was there a sun? He asked. There was light, but no yellow thing hanging in the sky. More like light, like behind a curtain, something hiding its face. It never moved. It was always above us, and never warm. She scratched the edge of the table, feeling for splinters. Shadows were slow, like honey falling. We never saw each other's faces clearly. We thought maybe we had none. Did you have animals? We had cows, sort of. They were soft and smaller than yours. Instead of moo, they made a sound like meh. They liked salt. They didn't walk much. The moss fed them where they stood. Also, there was no wind. The leaves shook sometimes, but it was like the trees were sighing. Not the air, the ground there, is full of sighs. Did you live in houses? Not like here, more like hollows. They were warm inside, fuzzy almost. The walls grew. He didn't understand. She didn't explain. We didn't cook, she said. We soaked things, roots mostly, and beans, always beans. We cracked the pods with our teeth and let the beans swell in water until they split like little lungs. She still hated milk, said it tasted like the slime on river rocks. But she liked beans, crushed with a stone and mixed with water. She drank it from a cup when no one was looking. What about people? We had people, of course. Her voice went quieter. But they didn't talk the way you do. They didn't ask so many things. They hummed. We understood. Everyone in her land was green, not bright, more like the inside of beans or frogs' bellies, kind green, green that didn't ask anything of you. And the bells, they were round, far. They made the air go soft, like a cloth over your ears. But before we left, they came closer, as if they had grown legs and walked toward us. She said she and her brother followed the sound, into a hole, a tunnel, a cave. She couldn't remember which. The walls were slick and warm, like the throat of something old. They walked a long way in the dark, held hands. He was humming. She remembered that. When they came out, the light was wrong. The colours hurt, the sun screamed. People screamed back. She never spoke much of the river that surrounded her home like a moat, only that on the other side was a place that shimmered gold, or white, or something else entirely. She said her brother saw it too. She wanted to cross. He didn't. She looked back when she spoke of it, as if the river might still be there, behind her. 5. Centuries later, the experts arrived. In books, on the internet, in footnotes and forums. They came with theories like nets. A doctor said, chlorosis, green skin from iron loss, malnutrition. Broad beans were iron-rich, her body craved them instinctively. Nothing strange at all. A historian said, Flemish refugees, war-traumatized, speaking a dialect no one in Suffolk understood. Green a misdescription, perhaps they were olive-skinned from a Mediterranean sun. A folklorist said, a changeling tale. Classic border myth, river, bells, crossing. One child stays, one fades. The cost of stepping between worlds. A physicist centuries later said, they phased. The vibrational spectra of their world were incompatible with ours. Light frequencies warped their skin. Protein structures collapsed. One adapted, one did not. Others argued. One monk's notes claimed they had no navels. Another swore the girl had gills behind her ears. A broadsheet said both children had tails. A pamphlet warned against planting beans near graveyards. One farmer said the boy's grave never grew moss. Another said it grew only moss. A third swore the field went silent every year on the day he died, though no one was quite sure where it was. None of them ever asked what her favourite sound was, the inside of a bell, or why she cried only once a year, when the beans came back, or what she saw in the river that her brother didn't, or what colour the sky is in the place she still dreams of. They still dug the pits, year after year, because of what might crawl out of them on a hot, thunder-heavy day. Once, 2 green children came out of the earth. Only one stayed. But some said she didn't stay entirely. There were sightings, not often, but enough. A girl seen walking barefoot along the riverbank just before dawn. A maid who saw her standing at the orchard's edge, lips moving in sleep. A boy who saw her waist deep in the mill pond, stepping backward into water without a splash. She kept small things in her apron, smooth stones, dried pods, striped feathers, said they were nothing, sorted them carefully. The manor rotted, the name faded, the green was forgotten. But in some versions of the story, she still dreams of the river. Not to go back, just to see what shines on the other side. And in certain lights, the pits don't look like traps. They look like mouths, waiting to transport you. That was our first story. But the atlas never closes with a single page. Another tale awaits, drifting in from the edges of what we believe. Truth or invention, you decide. Gluckly, intro. In a snowy town that doesn't exist on most maps, something was made that should never have worked, let alone lived. 1. Not every story is true, but some are real. This one comes from a snowbound town tucked into the crooked ribs of the Austrian Alps, a place called Grefwald where roofs wear frost like fur and goats are born with legs of uneven length to climb the slopes. Grefwald has no train station, no cathedral, just a post office that closes when the postmaster drinks too much Zerbenschnaps, a pine cone liqueur brewed by old men who won't say where. It's where the clockmaker lived. Though he wasn't a clockmaker, not really. People didn't bring watches to him for repair. That's just the closest the town, where everyone knew everyone and everything they did could come to assigning him both a profession and a name. Today you might call him an eccentric, or an inventor. One of those people who fall out of the sky with ideas too early for the world to use. Sometimes they push us forward. Sometimes they dry up like husks and blow away. He didn't live in the house his parents left him. That stood across the lane, shutters bowed, stove rusted, full of silence. Instead he stayed in the two-tiered garage, a workshop below, a hayloft-sized room above. He slept in an old sled lined with wool blankets and a pillow stuffed with pine shavings. Said it reminded him of being pulled through the forest by his mother, long ago, before his father's horse went lame and everything went still. He was not a grieving man, not social, not dull. If anything, he was a busy man, always thinking things, drawing those things, then bringing them, somehow, to life. His first creations came in his teens, when his parents were still alive. He built crickets, small ones lacquered bright green. He let them loose by the dozens and neighbours began waking to their high mechanical songs, but out of season, out of place, out of patience. One old woman stepped on 3 in a single night. Others began paying children a few pfennig each to collect the fragments and drop them, like warnings at his door. So he started painting them white and pale ice blue to blend with the snow. They didn't last long, a few weeks maybe, just prototypes. He once gave a grandfather clock legs, real legs, carved from a broken rocking horse. One snowy evening it leapt off the bench and bolted. An old man swore he chased it halfway through Grefwald before it found its rhythm and ran like a hound, chasing something only it could see. It was never found. Then he built birds, pink ones first, then purple ones that perched in trees and sang like wind-up music boxes. The town didn't mind those. Girls called them romantic. Boys said they helped them sleep. Good for summer, but dangerous in winter. So he made dogs to protect the birds. Children had started throwing stones. At the approach of a child, the dogs' mechanical tails would stiffen, their heads would lower, their engines would growl. Then came birds that howled, dogs that chirped. And finally came the girl. 2. He didn't build her to replace anyone. He built her for the oldest reason of all. One Adam would understand. He built her because he wanted company, and all the real women in town wanted real men, with real jobs, real hobbies, time, energy to spend on them. He had none of those things. He'd never felt quite real himself. Her name was Gluckly the Little Bell. Her body was carved from pine and linden, padded with quilt batting and a strange paste, half wax, half plumber's putty. Her skin dented under a fingertip, but could be smoothed again with warmth and patience. It shimmered like egg cream. Her eyes were glass, but not ordinary. Their pattern came from a teacup he'd once seen in Smolensk. Russian bone porcelain shot through with faint gold veins under the glaze. She didn't run on a key, not like a toy. Each night, the clockmaker would fold open a small panel in her back, 2 hinged doors like saloon shutters or the wings of a chapel, and type a phrase into the brass-framed typewriter embedded in her spine. A Rheinmetall KST, German-made, heavy, reliable. Just one phrase, typed slowly. It had to be the same each night. If it wasn't, she would forget the day. If it was too long, she would twitch. If it was nonsense, she would cry. Afterwards, he plugged her into an old lamp socket using a black and white fabric-wrapped cord that hummed softly when it worked. Her body would warm. Her chest would rise, not with breath, but with air drawn into 2 small bellows tucked beneath her ribs. Her exhalations escaped through a narrow set of fluted brass tubes, like a church organ choking on a whisper. When she sighed, it sounded like an apology. When she gasped, the dogs and birds startled and flew to the rafters to hide. 3. She sat for 15 days. On the 16th, she spoke. Before that, she used blocks, old children's toys, to spell her name. Glockli. She liked the umlaut, pressed the dots with pride. Her voice was breathy, airy, more wind than word, but it had cadence, shape. One neighbour girl said it sounded like a ghost who'd learned manners. She asked questions, not just about heaven or God or death, though those came, but also, why does your food smell good but turn to waste? Why do you snore when you sleep? Why do you drink wine if it makes you sway? Why do dogs look backward before lying down? Why do you write letters and never send them? Why do some people love things that hurt them? Why does nobody look up at the stars if they're so special? She found a dead bee lying on a matchbox. This one's asleep. Don't wake it. She shooed the fake birds when they tried to perch on her shoulder. They're not real, she said once. Just stories made of feathers. The clockmaker laughed until he coughed, then looked at her quizzically, a little afraid. 4. But the real animals liked her, and they came. Only the brown ones, squirrels, deer, dogs with rust-coloured coats, wolves. They gathered near the workshop at dusk, pressing their noses to the low windows. Once, 5 wolves sat in a row like pupils listening to a lesson. Gluckly placed her hand on the glass but didn't open it. The villagers grew uneasy. They whispered about demons with porcelain skin. They remembered old fairy tales they pretended to forget. At first, they noticed only the wolves. Then they saw the girl behind the window, drawing on the fogged glass with one finger, wolf shapes, moon shapes. The clockmaker had crossed an invisible line, from odd to unsettling, from eccentric to something that made them shift in their sleep. So they went to the priest, and the priest came. He entered holding a holy book. He left with it unopened. He and Gluckli sat for hours. She asked him if angels had teeth. He said yes. She asked if they chewed their prayers. He didn't answer. She asked if God built time with his hands, or if he just breathed and the clock began. The priest flipped pages in his book, never landing. Fanned them like a card trick. He cleared his throat too often. His boots squeaked. He stared at the stove, as if it might give him something to say. She asked what sins look like when they're babies. He said nothing, but his knuckles turned white around the book's spine. 5. When the villagers asked what happened, he said he was working on it. then scurried back into the church. Or maybe he dragged his feet. A boy down the road fell in love with her, of course. He said her laugh made his ribs itch. They kissed once behind the blacksmith's shed. He swore her lips were warm and her breath smelled like cedar. He said he could hear ticking inside her when she was near. She told him, "Your heart is louder than mine." He began leaving her things, wooden birds with chipped beaks, crickets carved from pine, their legs uneven, their wings too thick. He'd line them up on her windowsill before dawn, hoping she'd see him as a maker too. Gluckly studied them, then opened the window and knocked them into the snow. One by one, the clockmaker built a monkey next. It mimicked voices, scratched itself, clapped its hands when bored. It tried to answer her once, truly it did. But it only screeched, wild and hollow, as if it thought noise could be meaning. It clapped and bowed like a parody. Gluckly stared at it and whispered, "That's not me," then turned her back forever. The villagers disliked it too, said it was impudent. One night, someone threw a rock through the workshop window. The monkey stopped working soon after. Gluckly didn't mourn it. Maybe the monkey knew it was unloved and turned itself off. If machines can do that. 12 years passed. The clockmaker aged quietly. His hands trembled more, but still found the right keys each night. He never told anyone the phrase, not one, not even Gluckly. The keys were the power of life and death. Sometimes she stood at the edge of the trees, arms behind her back, humming. Sometimes she crouched in the snow and stared at the moon without blinking. Sometimes the villagers said they heard her singing, low and sad, in a language no one knew. Once the mayor's daughter followed the sound. She swore she saw Gluckly dancing in a clearing. 7 brown wolves circled around her, heads bowed like choir boys. Some said she was an angel, some a witch. Others whispered she was not born at all, just dropped from the wooden moon. 6. And then she was gone. The morning was grey and uneventful. The dog didn't bark. The sled bed was empty. The small back panel of her spine lay alone on the workshop table. No footprints in the snow, no signs of forced entry, no note. She was gone. Some say the priest stole her, ashamed of his affection. Some say the boy ran off with her into the woods and froze with a smile on his face. Some say she left of her own will, chasing something even he couldn't invent. The clockmaker never spoke of her again, but he still built out of habit more than hope. Only now he built things that silenced the world. He made bells that rang only when they heard other bells. They rang back with a pitch so soft it drowned the rest out. A clock that ticked inward, not out. He made boxes that hummed with a kind of absence, like padded rooms or snowfall. He built crickets that hissed when someone spoke. Mechanical flowers that hid their faces with their petals when someone walked by. None of these things spoke. He never built another voice. He sat often in his sled, even when not sleeping, staring at the stove until it blinked out. Sometimes he'd move his hands in the air as if assembling something only he could see. Other times, he just sat. And over time, he too grew quiet, stiff, still. People would peer in his windows and say he'd gone wooden himself, that the old man had become his own invention. When he died, it took a doctor from the next town to be sure. The only way they knew for certain was that his hands had stopped building things. They laid him in a box of polished pine, like one of his own, because that's what we do when people go still. We wrap them in wood and bury them in the earth, hoping that something better will grow. As for Gluckley, she must have discovered the sentence the watchmaker hid. What I made me. Was it true or just a well-told lie? Tell us what you believe and why. We know many of you listen late at night, sometimes while drifting off to sleep. Maybe you're wrapped in polar bear blankets, deep in the Arctic dark. Maybe you're swinging in a jungle hammock, wrapped up like a snack. Or maybe you're alone in a quiet room, or so you think. Let us know where you're listening from, and whether this story kept you awake or gave you good dreams. And one more thing. If you know a rare or hidden place, a ruin, an old legend, a forgotten town, share it in the comments. Your suggestion might become part of the atlas. If you enjoyed wandering these forgotten corners, subscribe and join us again for another journey into the unknown.